Hello, I'm Monsilun, and I'm here to talk about assessment. First, let me define what assessment is. Assessment is collecting information from different activities, tests, observation, analyzing this information, judging this information, and then taking a decision according to this analysis. Depending on the decision we take, we can talk about one function or another function of assessment. On the one hand, we can take the decision of passing a student or whether he is going to go to the next school year, for example. And this is what we do when we have the social function of assessment. On the other hand, we can use this decision to help students regulate their learning process. And then we are talking about their pedagogical function of assessment. In fact, we talk about three different types of assessment. Initial assessment, which has a diagnostic function. The idea is to see which is the starting point of the student, and this happens at the beginning of the school year, at the beginning of the term, at the beginning of the unit. We can also talk about the formative function of assessment, which is identifying the situation, the learning process that the student is carrying out, and helping them improve, be a better at what he's doing. So we are talking about formative assessment, assessment as learning or for learning. And finally, there is a third function, which is summative assessment. And here we are not helping students be a better learner. What we are doing here is we are looking back at their learning process and see which is the level that he has reached. In fact, if we can make a metaphor, we can talk about cooking. When you are in the kitchen and you are tasting what you are cooking, you can try to put a little bit more of salt, or maybe you need 2 more minutes at the oven, in the oven, or this is the formative part. When you serve this dish to the table, then your guest will tell you, delicious, yummy. This is the summative assessment. There is no going back to the kitchen. So it is very important that we understand that this has to be done very often in the unit. Formative assessment has to be very often, whereas the summative assessment can happen at the end of the year. And we can also understand that if this formative assessment is carried out in a very effective way, of course, the level of attainment at the end of the term, at the end of the unit, is going to improve, is going to be much higher. This is the important thing, okay? So sometimes we start thinking about whether there are like two types of assessment, right? Because traditionally we have been looking at the contents, whether students know it. And we have forgotten how well they can use these contents. Now, of course, I'm a competent driver because I can drive, but I cannot be a competent driver without knowing the rules. I need to know that the red light means that I have to stop. So the same happens in English, for example, right? Students have to know when to use it. They have to put their knowledge into action. And this is what competency-based assessment is all about, right? So there is no war between these two concepts. We have to have a balance, okay? So what can we do in order to assess students formatively? How can we help them learn? So experts talk about these three things, and in fact, I would add two more. I think that the best thing to do that is we have to share the objectives at the beginning of the unit, for example, of the school year. We also have to help them plan what they have to do in order to achieve these objectives. They also have to know what an excellent final product is like, so the assessment criteria. We have to use the errors as springboards, not as penalties. And this is probably going to be useful if we use effective feedback. What about assessment of learning? Well, of course, you are competent if you can do this in other contexts and different situations. And this is assessment of learning, which is also a very important part, but as I said, not so much as assessment for learning. Well, I hope that I have helped you understand these three main concepts.